Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, babies and citizens, this joy to the world. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, babies and citizens, this joy to the world. I bring a message of the truth amidst a world full of lies. I graduated from learning lies to seek the truth. Indoctrinated to be too blind to see the proof. I once was lost, but now I'm found, so I shine light. And everywhere I go is darkness, so I shine bright.
I don't think you get the gravity, the seriousness of the situation, boy. It's blasphemy. It's sickening, a sick and twisted, wicked Satan strategy attacking. It's a battle for our spirituality, removing understanding of creation, our centrality to manipulate the masses' mentality. It's a tragedy. The lying signs and wonders from the powers, principalities, they got you thinking heaven somewhere in a distant galaxy. And I am West Blaze, and this is Uncommon Ground, episode 13, Gravity Not Included. And I'm joined as always by the context bear extraordinaire, fellow firmamentalist friend, Sean. How are you doing tonight, brother? What's happening?
I'm doing great. That's a great intro, brother.
Thank you kindly. Joining us from on the road, we got Sean here in the house tonight. I'm thankful, brother.
Yeah, you guys get to see me in the hotel room tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to apologize for the mix-up of the scheduling. We had a little bit of mistake there, but we are here. We're live, and we got the technological difficulties out of the way. I think we're going to have a good show still.
Hopefully. Pray for us out there.
We do. We ask for your prayers. But absolutely, this topic is kind of a big one. It's a little bit of a sticking point, and it can be a big stumbling block for people that are considering these things, whereas otherwise they don't necessarily agree with everything we say. We try to present some of these things to them. You see it happen often that gravity can kind of be a Swiss Army knife of sorts, that it covers a lot of bases and fills up a lot of the plot holes.
That's right.
And
they try to use it to fill the plot holes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they tried to.
We're done. We're done, Wes. Let's just turn on. Stop making these videos. We're done. Let's go home.
Neil deGrasse already did it. Nonetheless, we are here. We're alive, and we're happy that y'all made it. Well, you could be anywhere in the whole flat world as always, but you're here tonight with us, and we thank you for it. And we just want to shout out to some of the people in the chat. I know Miss Morgan, Wildly Unpopular, is here. And then we had Arc Builder CCMC, James Apple, Miss Wendy, Noel Zoe Young, The Prodigal Son, Deep Holes, Mr. Hannibal, shout out, Jeremiah 1516. It is a full house, and I was super excited and uplifted to see how many people were already in the chat. I know they were waiting on the show to get started, get ready, but we also have some comments from some of our previous shows that we kind of want to look into, from people that have been blessed and are blessing others, apparently, because Keeping It Real Estate over on the Instagram says, I actually have a testimony for you guys. And he was commenting this under, Sean, he was commenting on one of our songs, right? I believe this was the Don't Let Me Go song. Nice. And so he says, I actually have a testimony for you guys. I led a bro to Yah by using you guys. He is an atheist into rap and just found Yah. In case you don't know, every time you say hallelujah, you're saying Yahuwah, short for Yahuwah, which is a name of the creator. And so he says that is working out. Our music is helping. And Mike Marinoth there agrees. He says, wow, all glory to Yah. Next comment, Sean, can you see this one? You want to read it?
Yeah, the Dominican 123, he's saying, keep up the good work. You and Sean, great content. Fire heart. I think it's
fire emoji. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
good deal. We appreciate you.
Dominican. Yeah.
Shout out. Miss Michelle Wilcox. She says, I have been so blessed by watching each of you. Music, creation, cosmology, context. You guys are truly a joy to get to know in Yahushua's name. We appreciate that. Thank you kindly, Michelle.
Yeah, it's nice.
Our brother, Michael Solomon.
Yeah, we'll see him at the conference, I believe, right?
Yes, sir.
I think so. He says NASA has always known the Earth is flat and closed and non-rotating. None of their technology could work on a globe since the globe does not exist. They have always known this, but one has to research to discover what they truly know. This is an excellent video. Truth. you remember what video this comment was on?
True squared. This was on a NASA, documents clip of mine. Yes, sir. Yeah, shout out Michael Solomon over at Flat Out Insights, hanging out with Mr. Chris at Take on the World. In case you have not heard, Take on the World Conference is this August 19th through 22nd, and we are going out there to Vermilion, Ohio, the Uncommon Ground crew, us two, and we will be presenting. I've been invited to perform, and we're going to have a great time. Hope to see some of y'all there. Well, we got a presentation to jump into, but are we ready for that?
Well, we just want to remind folks and want to also give a big shout out and a thank you to everyone that's a patron. If you guys haven't already seen what we're doing with our Patreon, is we're actually the funds that people are donating. The majority of those, like 99% of those, are going towards our firmament project. And so what we're doing is we have two brothers that have decided to help us, and they're going to help us build an actual working firmament model, kind of like what you just saw on screen there with that last image. And so it's even going to have a little Sheol below. Isn't that right, Wes?
Yeah. So we want to make it functional, give it 3 functions, be able to make it represent the flood, be able to drain that down to the right water level, and then be able to make the kingdom descend, which will be a cool thing too. I've never seen done. Super excited about that. If y'all want to support that, if you'd like to see that dream become a reality, we are progressing in it quite nicely, and we would love your support. Check out the Patreon. You can become a monthly donator. And otherwise, I let it be known last episode that it was a little bit of a concern of mine to be able to make it to the conference. And some people really stepped up and reached out and made sure that that's not going to be a problem. And I just really appreciate it. I was blown away by the donations, contributions, and the love that people are showing. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
That's super great, everybody. It's awesome. That is awesome. So this particular episode, Gravity Not Included, people thought, what's kind of a play on some other stuff. But the idea is, people would say, because we're so brainwashed is what I would say, but we're so learned to think that gravity is such just a common thing all around us, right? This is what everyone just thinks, right? You trip on foreign furniture, you fall over, you think, oh, gravity took me to the ground. You know what I mean? You drop something, you think, oh, gravity took it to the ground.
Yeah.
But is that really the case?
It's accepted as a law. People speak of it as the law of gravity. However, from my understanding, it has never been more than really a theory, something theorized, hypothetical.
It is, and there's multiple theories of how it works, and those theories have changed over time. We're going to review some of the history of how the theory has changed, and even in modern day science, they will tell you it's still just a theory. It cannot be proven. We're going to go over some of the actual science as well. But as always, we're going to have fun with it. So make sure you stay to the end, guys. And also hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell so you don't miss any new shows going this way forward. So
please and thank you. We got an intro clip.
I think we actually do. Let's give people a little teaser here about what is this gravity idea, because they just not even everyone else knows.
No.
Sorry, man, 1 second.
You're all right. Yeah, no, we play these at the end of the episode previous, prior, but then I just spend so much time and have so much fun putting these together, and I feel like I have so much fun watching them over and over again that can't help but show them again.
Let's open it. It's a good setup.
What is gravity?
I have no idea. Okay, next question.
Wow.
No, here's the difference. We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things. But when you start asking, like, what it is, I don't know.
Snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes gravity.
Have you ever wondered why we have heard about a force called gravity our entire lives, and yet nobody has ever been able to prove that it exists, even though untold numbers of experiments have been performed seeking its cause?
But if gravitons are everywhere, why can't we see them? Unfortunately, a single graviton is too measly to detect, so we had no evidence of them. But scientists made another assumption about the moment after the Big Bang.
Well, he just looks at me and said,
Don't believe in gravity. Don't believe in fantasies. Don't believe 'cause a theory's all it is. It's never been proven, but they teach it
to the kids.
Let's go. Yeah, and like you said, Sean, this is a theory that has changed over time. You know, they've often kind of contradicted themselves amongst the experts, right? In trying to decide what causes gravity, how it's caused, and you know, the reasonings behind this so-called force. But from what I find, some experts disagree with the experts, but the experts agreed that the only experts that were the experts who agreed with the experts. So you don't know what to believe, but we're here to set the record straight.
It sounds like the collegiate process. Find people to disagree with you so you can get published, and suddenly it's known fact at that point. Yeah,
very much so.
Get rid of all the dissenters. In fact, we have some people in the audience just kind of making some general assessment, because a lot of people are interested in this. And cover with Jeremy Pierce saying this theoretical pseudoscience, talking about gravity. Michael John says just simply buoyancy and density. And then Mr. Anderson, which is I think leading into what we're going to talk about, he actually just says all it does is describes an effect. That's it. And so we actually, I think we wanted to talk about some effects that we can observe, right? And test.
Yes.
That are ascribed to gravity, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and give me just 1 second, because I believe I had my page closed down on me, unbeknownst to me.
That's all right.
Yeah, technical difficulties, because I am trying something new tonight, multitasking. But otherwise, yes, sir, we know that we are not to be ignorant of the devil's devices, of the schemes and the deceivers. I can't count how many times Scripture says not to be deceived. And so as Christians, which if you are a follower of Christ, this is a word, Christian, that is only defined as a follower of Christ and its original intention as the word was intended. So if you follow the anointed one, the Messiah, there's a Greek word for that word Messiah, the anointed one, that means Christ. It says Christ. And as a follower of that, there's a word called Christian. And so we as Christians should not be ignorant of the devil's devices, shouldn't be deceived, and we should be learning about all we can so that we can help ourselves. And I think I got it pulled back up now. So we got some scripture to go over tonight.
Oh,
there it is. Can you see it?
No.
Okay.
Let me
share. I got to share it again.
There you go.
That's the one. Okay. Boom. Good deal.
There it is.
And scroll it up right there. That'll have to work. Would you take this one first, please, sir?
Sure. This is Hebrews 1:1-3. It says, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days, did he say he spoke through his son? No, it says he spoke through the prophets, right? I'm sorry.
That's
anyway,
right.
So in many prophets, in many portions, and in many ways, in these last days, he's spoken to us in his son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, that's speaking of the Son, Yeshua, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high.
That's right. Hey, did I send this to you? I can't remember. Did you pick this one, or did I send it to you to use?
You sent it to me. Yeah.
I did. Okay, cool. Can you guess why I thought this would be applicable?
Well, just as we start to jump into the idea of how the creation works, and we have the model here behind us. So we see that there's multiple layers of firmament. We reviewed this on episode 1. And then we also see how everything is designed in our realm. Everything goes down, but ultimately all of it is held together. So what we're going to talk about is the effects of what makes things go down. But even within what things, the observable reality that we see, all of it is held together. Or as the psalmist would put it, or the Hebrews writer would put it, it's upheld by all things by the word of his power. So this is one of those ideas, like what is actually upholding all things so that they keep functioning.
Right.
Yeah.
There's another one in Colossians that comes to mind. Can you think of it?
Colossians 1:16.
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Yeah. I don't have it.
That's okay.
All things.
Here it is, 1:16. It says, "For by him all things were created," and that's a word that means through him, on account of him, for him. By him, all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. And it was the next verse, 17. He is before all things, Yeshua, Christ, and in him all things hold together. And so I just thought it was interesting in parallels here that it says by the word of his power, all things are upheld. So we got things being held together and things being upheld by the word of God.
Yeah, and I think it's probably not a coincidence in Genesis 1:1. It says that, the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Yahweh, was hovering over the waters of the deep, and then God spoke, and things were being created, right? God spoke every single day of creation. He spoke by the word of his power. Things were created through the effectuation of his Spirit. And so, yeah, to me, it's just, it's very, and we've already talked about cymatics in previous episodes, but there's something interesting there. Now, we don't want to derail off on that because we got so much other stuff to cover, but we'll probably do a separate episode just on that in the future.
Yeah, 100%. Star in a jar. We got the cymatics, the sand, all kinds of cool stuff. So, what are we looking at? Let's see.
A lot of people don't realize the word gravity is actually in the scriptures.
It depends on which one you're looking at, right? What translation, what version. However, the very predominant popular King James does use it twice.
It does. It's actually, but it's not used in the way that the world uses it. So I think it's kind of funny that it's kind of, you get that synonym there, or at the what would this be called? It's not a homophone. It's a what was it called? So there's synonyms, homophones. In the chat. It's a word.
Homonym.
It's a homonym, a word that means something different but sounds the same. It's the exact same word.
Yeah.
So Titus 2:6-8 says, "Young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded, in all things showing yourself a pattern of good works and doctrine, showing yourselves uncorruptness and gravity and sincerity and sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you." So what does this sound like?
In what specifically? What the word gravity in its context?
What does this sound like gravity is being used right here?
That's okay. Well, so all I can say is that my only understanding of the definition outside of this theoretical construct of what we're talking about tonight, my only other understanding of the word gravity was something serious, something grave, and so that's where I would have guessed. However, it's speaking in the context of uncorruptness, sincerity, and we'll see the definition here in just a second. But there's one other verse that uses it, if we could, before we check out that definition.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, real quick, it was young men likewise exhort, right, to be sober-minded. It's just giving good instruction, talking about in doctrine and teachings. And so, but then the next verse we have from the King James as well that uses the word gravity. 1 Timothy 3:2-5 says a bishop. And how would you best define a bishop? Is that like a preacher or a shepherd of a congregation?
Yeah, he's someone that's an elder who's proved he knows the word and has a good temperament, a good life. He's able to lead people. Yeah.
Cool. Yep. So a bishop then must be blameless. We see a couple definitions for that. That's somebody that's also righteous, that keeps the commandments, Deuteronomy 6:25. But this says a bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant. The husband of how many wives? Just a popular topic. Vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy or filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? So again, we see this word gravity. So anything to say about that passage before we look at the definition?
Well, I think he's the idea of the gravity here that he's trying to impose is absolutely matters to our behavior. So that's which I would say you would take very seriously.
Correct. Yeah.
When it comes to the faith, yeah.
We should. So here's the Greek word, and you want to give your best pronunciation of that?
Oh yeah, it's gunavotanata.
No, it was not.
No,
are you serious?
Simnatita.
All right, cool. The first one sounded kind of cooler.
You didn't know I spoke in tongues, did you?
But this is Strong's Greek number 4587, and it does mean dignity, honor, gravity, which how much does that help? Seriousness, there was that word that I thought, but dignity specifically, and honor, and then from semnos, the root Greek word meaning venerableness. So this is used in a positive manner, whereas everything else we're going to be talking about tonight associated with the word gravity is you know, we're going to have to be debunking some deception. So this one, dignity, is how you will see it translated in like the New American Standard or some other translations. They'll say dignity.
Yeah. Now they treat this word gravity outside of Scripture with all types of seriousness to the capacity that it supports their occultic theologies, by which this model is made off of. But none of what they describe and attribute this word gravity to can actually be none of it's venerable. It cannot be venerated. It cannot be shown to be forthright, true, or substantiated or upheld. And that's what we're going to jump into real quick.
Right. Yep. So I don't think we have a slide for it, but gravity, you know, we're going to see in a quote here in a moment that it came from the Latin gravitas, which just means heavy. But so, yeah. Are we looking at centrifugal versus centripetal force first?
Yeah, this is what I was talking about earlier about, at least this is the order that you sent.
That's all right. Yeah. So we'll just make it work.
You want to
So
skip to something else?
there's a video that we might just play here in a minute. Let's just do that. So we'll do this first. But centrifugal force, you know, you hear these two different forces, centrifugal, like a centrifuge, and then centripetal. And so centrifugal force here is defined as an apparent force. I like that they use the word apparent here versus the other definition. An apparent force that acts outward on a body moving around a center, arising from the body's inertia. And so this force is apparent, which is defined as visible, clearly, you know, you can observe it, whereas it's outward. And so we have the picture here of the Gravitron carnival ride, which is very popular in a lot of those traveling carnivals you'll see. And you get in one of these things, in case you don't know, you sit in it and you lean up against the wall that starts spinning. And then before you know it, you'll see kids climbing up the wall because they're stuck to it. And that centrifugal force, the same thing that when you're on a merry-go-round, that you're being flung off of it by the centrifugal force due to the spin. And it's an outward pushing force. You know, it doesn't ever pull you towards the center of whatever's spinning, does it? The centrifugal force.
No. And what's interesting is that, as you can see in the picture here, and I just rode the Gravitron like a week ago and got sick on it. It actually pushes you away, right? It doesn't allow you to go down. That's why those little pads that girls land on sideways, those pads are on little tracks that slide up, so it's allowing for the centrifugal force to work inside the Gravitron and allow her to be sliding up and away from the center of the spinning motion, which means it's quickly overcoming the downward pull. So the centrifugal force, like it just by a magnitude. I mean, I weigh 210 pounds, so like by a great magnitude, it lifts you up off your feet and throws you away at a perpendicular angle away from the actual downward pull. So it's just right here is a force that can be done just because of circular motion. Anything on the exterior of that circular motion immediately ignores the downward pull, but yet we don't observe this as we walk around on the earth every day.
That's right. Even though they tell us that at the equator, the earth spins an average of 1,048 miles per hour. Pardon me. Yeah. And so that spin doesn't create this outward force that they say, you know, gravity has to combat. And that's a big part of why they say that there needs to be this force that holds us down, is to combat and counteract against this centrifugal force that would happen if the earth were spinning. However, if you paid attention through other episodes, then you probably have reached the conclusion that it doesn't. Nonetheless, centripetal force. And now, do you have the video queued up for this one? I just remembered it.
Yeah, do you want to do the video first? Or
let's do it right after this slide. So you want to read centripetal force for us. Notice, however, if you would, that word apparent that they put in the other definition of centrifugal is not in this one.
So centripetal force, or centripetal, in case you want to figure out how to say it and not get confused. Centripetal force is a force that acts on a body moving in a circular path and is directed towards the center around which the body is moving. So
that's what they say.
Yeah,
it is, because I have some mixed feelings about it. I understand that there can be a force created, that there's, depending on how we're defining force, if we're doing it according to physics, right? There's motion, acceleration, and energy that is created when you spin something from a string, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or when you have something on a track that then does a flip, a loop. But is this really the force that they say it is? Or is it just the result of an acceleration and an attachment to a track or a string causing this action to happen? So I'd love it if you'd play this clip to kind of illustrate what I'm saying better.
Sounds good.
Please and thank you. If you're in the chat,
Imagine
you're having a
you've
good
got
time,
a tennis
say
ball
yeah.
attached to a piece of string, and you start swinging it in circles. Whoa now, watch out for your buddy. Let's take a closer look at the fascinating physics of this simple action. You've probably heard of Newton's second law of motion as it relates to objects moving in a straight line. Turns out, Newton's second law also tells us about the net force on an object as it moves in a circle. When an object moves in a circle, its velocity changes direction. Since the velocity is changing, that means we have an acceleration. And we know from Newton's second law that if we have an acceleration, we have a net force. Now back to our spinning ball. For objects undergoing circular motion, the net force on the object is called the centripetal force. It's a weird sounding word, but it's Latin for the phrase center seeking. It's named centripetal because the centripetal force always points to the center of the circle, attached to a piece of string.
Centripetal force is a force that makes an object, like planets or other satellites in space, follow a curved path.
The ball has a tangential velocity, so if you suddenly cut the string, it would fly off in whatever the tangential direction was at the moment you made the cut. Assuming you don't cut the string and you keep swinging the ball's tangential velocity is constantly changing directions. This means the ball is accelerating, and the reason it's accelerating is due to the centripetal force. And you start swinging it in circles. The centripetal force acting on the ball is constantly directing the ball towards the center of the circle, your hand. This, combined with the ball's velocity, keeps the ball swinging in a circle, attached to a piece of string. The same centripetal force that keeps the tennis ball swinging in a circle also keeps roller coasters on the track as they go through a loop-de-loop. So the next time you're having a blast on a roller coaster, you can thank the centripetal force on the track, attached to a piece of string, and you start swinging it in circles. Centripetal force.
Are you sure about that?
So is it though? Is it the force that they say it is? Or is it just the string? Like in the acceleration that you're doing when you're...
This video has made me realize that all of my social greetings are completely awry. I need to start adding to my social greetings. Hey, Wes, how's your strings doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, how's your strings today? Your strings good today? Because I didn't realize that we're all tethered to the earth so we don't fly off in space. Is that what's pulling us down? Because ultimately, I didn't realize it. I mean, basically the subconsciousness of that basically just means you're a puppet on a string.
Or that the earth is attached to the sun with a string, or that they replace that string with this imaginary pseudoscience force called gravity. But it's kind of just Babylonian confusion, it feels like this centrifugal and centripetal forces stemmed and derived from Newtonian physics, Newtonian gravity that we're about to address here in a moment. So that came after Isaac Newton. But still, it's just kind of more confusing to add. Like, man, it's enough to say there's this gravity force, but now you got to add, things that we can observe, like centrifugal, and then say on top of that, there's something called centripetal force that only is really apparent if there's a string and something attached to it that you're spinning. Yeah. And so I'm a little confused by it all, but surely somebody can help us make sense of it. Or maybe the earth is just flat and stationary.
Yeah, and then we're going to explain very much other just demonstrable evidential ways instead of gravity, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. But yeah, I don't see a lot of evidence for centripetal force, specifically since apparently it requires two objects to be tethered. But then you're like, wait a minute, that's just tethering thing. You know what I'm
Exactly.
saying?
That's the tension
So-
in the string and the
it's-
acceleration of your hand.
It's weird.
Yep. So there was that centripetal clip. Here's another healthy reminder. They say, like I said earlier, the Earth is spinning an average of around 1,040 miles per hour at the equator. And then that would be different too. So keep in mind all the crazy calculations that snipers would have to do if that were really happening, because the closer you get to the North Pole, the slower that spin would be, because it's wider at the equator than it would be, so all kinds of crazy stuff there. Then they also say it's wobbling on an axis, which is normally referred to 23.4 degrees. However, if you subtract that from a 90-degree right angle, you're going to get 66.6 degrees. So same way, 23.4, 66.6, that's the axis that they say that the Earth is wobbling. And then it's also, imagine this, you can look this up. It's orbiting the sun, that they say, at 66,600 miles per hour, all while spiraling the Milky Way galaxy on the outer arms at 500,000. It's 500,000 miles per hour, ungodly speeds, shooting through the universe. Mind you, this whole galaxy, they say, is and man, I have to double check that one. This says at 666 million miles per hour. I would not be surprised if that's the case. Nonetheless, Polaris, the North Star, remains stationary above the North Pole, and that's from an alleged distance of 2 quadrillion miles away. Knowing that and seeing that, recognizing this is the case, while all this is said to be going on, it's priceless, man.
So our galaxy is tied to, I guess, the bigger solar system. Is that what's going on?
No, bro,
Like
it's
our
all a
solar
lie.
system-
None of that's real.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see, like, is that, if we can figure out where that string is in space, we could just use that as like a superhighway for, the Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk shuttles, and they can just be like, just straight into that big bright spot in those pictures of the solar system and galaxy, right?
You take the Virgin Galactic and then the phallus-shaped Origin Blue. You never know. Crazy stuff going on up there.
Yeah, those Origin Blue launches, man, those should be like rated R. Those are crazy. Those are sick.
It is. All right, is it time? We have some basic physics here, right? So there's lots. Oh, we didn't go over those. Oh well.
Speaking of the physics, real quick though, I just want to say, if we are on a ball in space that's spinning, and we'll probably do a whole episode on the Coriolis, but you mentioned snipers and how, you wouldn't feel any of these forces at play if you're a sniper, if you're closer towards the North Pole. So I'm just going to say, like, when I go to get my sniper's certificate, I'm just going to do it above the 60th North Parallel. Like, I can't take it anywhere below that. I won't make it. So that's all I'm saying is, make it easy for me and just send me straight to the North Pole to do my shooting. Other than that, do you want to talk about what's on the screen here? Did you want to?
Well, just to wrap up the centripetal versus centrifugal, we got the centripetal being an inward pulling supposed force. If that did exist, which it doesn't, then there's the centrifugal outward pushing that can be observed with things that are spinning. If an object is on something spinning, it's going to be flung outward unless there's a container. Nonetheless, this is if this is happening, the force of the globe's supposed 19 mile per second spin would also exist and have to be overcome. Yet neither of those opposing forces have ever been proven to exist outside the imaginations of heliocentrists, specifically centripetal and gravity, right? Or the reality of observable centrifugal force happening on the surface of the Earth, because it's not spinning. But yeah, we do have some basics of, the gravitational constant, right? And then that little g and the big G that they use in these equations. Now, I didn't do college math classes. I didn't, excel in these areas of fields of equations. However, I can understand the basics, and our gentleman that we're going to help us present is really fluent in being able to help present some of these basics, and it makes it easy to follow along. And so he's going to go over some of those physics 101 that we need to understand to try to see how they came up with this theory and some of the numbers behind it. And so I'm excited to put this presentation forth so people can kind of get a better idea too.
Hi, I'm Brian Mullen, and this is Balls Out Physics. This episode is mainly about gravity, but it's about the gravitational constant in the gravity equation. However, to get there, we need to start with some basic physics. And so I've set up a problem here with the Earth, represented by this blue ball, and me or any other man standing on the Earth, and how we determine the weight of that person, okay? Or the force of gravity acting on that person. Weight and the force of gravity are actually the same, or at least that's the accepted belief in physics. Weight is actually caused by the force of gravity of the Earth pulling down on the object, in this case, the person. And so the bread and butter physics equation up here, one of the first equations you learn in Physics 1 is force is equal to mass times acceleration. This is what Newton based all of his three laws of motion on. And since his boy Copernicus, 150 years prior, had come up with the solar system, he knew that he needed to come up with an equation that would not only work on Earth, but would work throughout the universe. Okay? And so what this equation says is that the force acting on an object is equal to the mass of that object multiplied times the acceleration that the object is experiencing. Okay? Since weight and mass are different, weight is actually considered to be a force. This force of gravity, I have weight over here and weight here, weight is equal to the force of gravity pulling me down. Okay? So this equation can be rewritten, F equals ma can be written as weight is equal to mass times little g here. And little g is considered the acceleration due to gravity, or the acceleration at which things fall towards Earth. So what this little g says is that all objects accelerate towards Earth at the same rate unless there's some type of fluid preventing them from falling at that rate. And so the more dense something is, the faster it'll fall through the air. The less dense, the slower. It's just like in water. Something heavier or more dense, more massive will sink faster than something that's less massive or less dense. And if the density is actually less than water, it'll float. The same with our air. That's how hot air balloons work. Or blimps with helium inside them, or balloons. That's why they float, because their density is less than that of air. But when you get rid of air or any fluid, everything follows at the same rate. Over here, we have the equation due to gravity. Yeah. And that says that the force of gravity is equal to the gravitational constant times the mass of one object, in this case me, this is represented by a little m, times the mass of another object, which would be the Earth, divided by the distance between them squared, which in this case would be the radius of the Earth. Okay? And the gravitational constant, which I should have written down here, is equal to 6.67408 times 10 to the negative 11 meters cubed over kilograms times seconds squared. Okay? So if you plug the mass of Earth, which I have written here, which is 5.9726 times 10 to the 24th kilograms, really big number, by mass, 72.6 kilograms, and the gravitational constant and the radius of Earth.
Just real quick, I just wanted to say to everybody watching, hopefully you guys understand that some of these variables, that he's like this big G, the gravitational constant, 6.67, at the very bottom of the screen, those are numbers that have been determined by someone else that are automatically plugged into the equation. So this is where they start with the trickery with inside the math, is that they actually they predetermine the variable and what that value is. And that's presupposed in many of these equations. So this is where you got to watch them. Now, Brian knows the truth. He's just explaining how this type of math is taught in physics. So
just 6,371,000 meters, you will get 712 newtons, roughly. Pretty close. Close enough to say it's the same. To say that to accept the fact that, the assumed fact that gravity is causing this weight, and that's why I have weight is equal to the force of gravity over here. Okay? This is what is taught in physics. That this force of gravity actually creates my weight, but there's just two different ways we can calculate it. Okay?
Did you guys hear that? He says that in physics, they teach people that weight is equal to the force of gravity. So just think about that for 2 seconds. That's how they teach people that you want to get to that at the very bottom equation, that G equals 6.67408 times 10. That whole big number is determined through another formula based off of the weight of something. So this is where we're going to talk about this in a little bit as far as the inverse square law of gravity, which is also based off the gravitational pull. It's also based off the mass and weight of something. So it's,
and Miss Lisa, you're right. They almost made it 666, didn't they? They tried, didn't they?
They really tried. But the point is that basically it's what's the word for this, Wes? Where you have something that is it's so redundantly obvious that it's stupid, but it's passed off as truth and amazement. Oh, it's called pseudoscience. Yeah. So that's what what we're seeing is that to say, oh, that gravity is equal to the weight of an object. And I'm like, bro, you don't need the word gravity then. You just need the weight of an object.
That's right.
Oh, by the way, did you see now something that is verifiable, demonstrable, and true is that top left corner, F equals ma. And he's talked about how the mass of an object equals the times the acceleration is equal to force. So I'm just like, that's amazing because that means the older and fatter I get, the more of a force I am to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and we'll go over a quote here in a second by Gerard Hickson that really puts this into perspective too. But yeah, and I definitely would recommend Brian Mullen's series here. He's got that whole episode too. I cut it down from 30 minutes to about 10 or 12 here, and there's some good key parts that we just didn't have time for. But yeah, go ahead with the video, Sean.
But Newton came up with this before he came up with the equation for gravity. And in fact, Newton only proposed the equation. He didn't actually finish it. He said, from looking at the solar system model and watching things in the sky that he thought, or he assumed were orbiting Earth based on Copernicus' work, that the force of gravity was proportional to the mass of one object times the mass of another object divided by the distance between them squared. Okay? He said they're proportional, they're not equal. So what this means is, if either one of these masses go up, or both of them go up, the force of gravity also goes up. But as the distance between them increases, the force of gravity goes down. As you can see, this is squared, so distance plays a big part here. So, he eventually proposed that he needed this big G up here, this gravitational constant. And he didn't know how to determine that, but he did know that the units would be what we have right here, meters cubed over kilograms times seconds. That said,
so Brian just said that Newton didn't know how to determine the big G in that formula, but he knew he needed it. And I think that's just hilariously ironic. He does need the big G.
Yeah.
Our Father Abba, that's what he needs.
There it is.
he theorized that there was this gravitational constant, but he didn't actually figure it out before he died. And it wasn't until 130 years later that a man named Henry Cavendish came along. Henry Cavendish was very wealthy, and he did a lot of things apparently. I've listened to some very respected physics teachers praise his work. Mostly what I was interested in was how he determined this gravitational constant.
Hey, can you pause
Cavendish
it?
Apparently.
Thank you. And if you would, this would be a great time to go over this quote before we get too far away from this segment, I think. Can you put this on screen?
Sure.
Or is it going to mess it up? Okay, cool. So nearly 100 years ago, this is a quote by Gerard Hickson, who wrote a book called Kings Dethroned in 1922. I haven't read the book yet, but I've had a lot of people suggest this book to me. So I was pleasantly surprised to see it come up in some quotes about this topic. And he said, nearly 100 years ago, Kepler had originally apparently suggested that some kind of unknown force must hold the earth and the heavenly bodies in their places. And now Sir Isaac Newton, Sir Isaac, what doesn't that usually mean? Royal Society, somebody, knighted by the British government. Isaac Newton, the greatest mathematician of his age, I would put some quotes there, took up the idea and built the law of gravitation, quote unquote again. The name is derived from the Latin word gravis, which means heavy, having weight, while the law of gravitation is defined as that mutual action between masses of matter, by virtue of which every such mass tends towards each other, with a force varying directly as the product of the masses, just like we saw Mr. Mullen here going over in his equation they put forth. Nonetheless, and inversely, go ahead.
It's happening right now.
Do you feel that attraction?
I
it was a
couldn't
face
stop
palm.
I couldn't stop
It was just a face palm. LOL.
15 square pounds per inch on each part of my body. It's happening again.
Getting silly. Have some gravity, Sean. No. All right. So, and then it goes over, it says, and inversely as the square of their distances apart, which we will go over here. That's a key topic to consider as well here in a moment. We'll look into that. But reduced to simplicity, gravitation is said to be that which attracts everything towards every other thing. That does not tell us much, he says. And yet, the little it does tell us is not true. For a thoughtful observer knows very well that everything is not attracted towards every other thing. I can think of lots of people that I'm not attracted to, you know? Yeah. So the definition implies that it is a force, but it does not say so. For that phrase, mutual action, is ambiguous and not at all convincing. I would have to agree with Mr. Hickson here. He said that well, especially that part about, you know, it's a gravitation is said to be that which attracts everything to every other thing. And that's just not observable.
No, it's the most ludicrous concept ever, because guys, just think for 2 seconds about how much everything around you weighs. Think about what we just heard from Brian talking about the basics of physics, where, you know, is force equals mass times acceleration. And this idea that what they're saying, that gravity is a force. And we're going to go over this here in a few minutes as well. They say that gravity is one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature. And we're going to show you how weak they measure that force to be. And I don't think it's gravity at all, but we'll talk about this in a minute. But the point is, think about if it is a force based off of the acceleration of mass. Oh, goodness grief. Why? Okay, so then the moment that I could never stand at a bus stop because all the traffic cars passing by would just pull me.
Way to go. Oh, there he is.
You could never do anything in life. The moment, I mean, like if anyone, like if just a big dude ran past you, you would just fall over. Like if it was literally if the force of the gravity was based off the mass times acceleration, everyone on the deck of an aircraft carrier that watches a jet takeoff would fall on their faces and probably be dragged off the ship and fall in the water. Like the ludicrousness of it. Like I am standing on the 3rd floor of a hotel right now, and the cement underneath my feet would be sticking my head to the ground because it weighs so much more than me. You see what I'm saying? But this is where we're going to get into how they try to overcome that with some more nonsense language that cannot be proven or tested here in a minute when we talk about Newton's idea of inverse square law of gravity. And
they're going to go over here. He was just starting to bring up a Mr. Henry Cavendish, which, like Isaac Newton, was also a active member in the Masonic lodges in his time, and he was a pretty wealthy gentleman. But he's going to go over this experiment where they supposedly proved this idea, this concept that all mass can attract all other mass through this constant force. But let's check out back on the video if we could.
Sure.
Had a lot of property, a lot of money, and he set up an experiment.
Towards the end of his life, he did a crucial experiment, which is represented by these lead balls.
You know, they haven't figured out the big G yet. They do know the radius of Earth, though, because they knew the circumference. So they knew the radius of Earth, but they didn't know big G, and they didn't know the mass of Earth. Okay? So going back to Cavendish,
and the radius.
Cavendish built this box. Okay? In this box, there was a pulley with a rope leading outside the box, like that, a little handle on it. Right? What hung from it was this thing called a torsion rod. It's something like this. And on the ends of the rod were these large lead balls. And on the inside were these smaller.
Kind of looks like the Blue Origin rocket.
Do you know how they actually start the pendulum, the one they have over in Europe?
Oh, you're talking about the
supposedly that works off this principle, and that supposedly is based off the 15-degree Coriolis effect of the Earth.
Yeah. What is that pendulum called? Dang it. It's escaping my mind.
I can't remember. Foucault's pendulum, right?
The Foucault. There it is. We'll have to do an episode on that one.
And it's ridiculous because they actually manually pull it back and let it go to start its swing. And you're
Exactly.
like, that's bro.
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence for that being a fraud and just a sideshow gimmick.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's carnival stuff. It's highbrow, very polished stainless steel or copper carnival stuff. And that's exactly what Brian is exposing here with this Cavendish experiment as well. It's literally a carnival trick based off of common things that the average person 150, 180 years ago didn't know how to disprove. And when all the Royal Societies are sitting there going, this proves part of creation, how you understand how things work and motion happens. This is our stamp of approval on it. Well, the average person is just busy with, the plague of the 1800s and trying not to get bit by a rat. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there's very few people out there like we have today that can go out here and test this stuff and start saying, wait a minute, this smells like nonsense. So,
and I even heard that even if they wore a mask and they took the SHOT, that the rat could still bite them. So, it's crazy.
That's right.
And he used lead because it's very massive, it's very dense. And he apparently, according to the history, he knew that he had to get away from the box because his gravity, his mass, would affect the experiment. Assuming that this is correct, that the force of gravity is, there's a force of gravity between any two masses, not just the Earth and us. All masses have a force of gravity on each other, create a force of gravity.
So, Wes, this means that if the audience is listening to Brian here explain that he's explaining Cavendish's experiments with these torsion rods and these two steel balls, which I think is hilarious because these guys are dressed in stainless steel outfits. And they both got bald heads. It's hilarious that he's saying Cavendish admitted that his personal body mass would have messed up the experiment. Guys, if anyone's out there that's ever tried to lose weight or tried to put on weight and gain weight for any type of sport or anything, or you just trying to make gains at the gym, right? Because you're a doer. If anyone's out there like that and you've stepped on a scale every single day, you know how much your body fluctuates, anywhere from 5 to 8, sometimes 10 pounds. Depends on your workout regimen, what you ate the day before. Is it Thanksgiving? Like your body fluctuates like crazy. So for him to even say, oh, I've got this thing out in my yard that's doing some sort of accurate measurements is just ludicrous because it's based off of something that his little body mass would be changing daily.
Yeah, he had to put some telescopes set up on it somehow.
Yeah.
So that he could then see it from a distance so that he didn't affect the bowling balls hanging from the wires.
Right.
It's crazy. All other masses based on this equation and the proportion that Newton came up with. And somehow he calculated big G from this. Okay. When I started researching this, I said, okay, well, let's see some examples of a modern day torsion rod experiment that somebody's built that shows how this works.
So this middle torsion rod here is hanging from a wire from its center. Oh, we got a visualization of some air conditioning flowing through the room. I wonder if that could be maybe what's causing it to move.
There's another set of lead balls inside there. This experiment really is very difficult to get to work, and a technician has sawed it apart because he got so frustrated.
Obtaining this oscillation was much harder than one might think. I had many instances where the torque force was not great enough, so the two just became permanent friends. In other instances, the force of torque was too great, causing it to swing full circle. It was also crucial not to disturb the system with any air currents or vibrations. Finally, I was able to get it to oscillate around the point after many, many tests. Goes up.
It was crucial not to disturb the experiment with too many air oscillations or vibrations.
That's right. Listen to what she says, though.
Air have anything to do with it.
Exactly.
And just for the audience's sake, Wes, are we looking at a rod balanced on a plate with the center point on the plate, like a high point on the plate?
I assumed, I might be wrong, but I thought in both of these cases it's hanging from a wire, because that's how Cavendish did it. So if they wanted to try to stay true to the tradition, they would have hung the torsion rod from a wire. But I might be wrong.
Just because of the downward view that we have from this little home experiment, it looks as if the torsion rod with the two little balls on the end of it is laying flush on the paper plate or whatever that is. But you're saying it's actually being suspended by a string we can't see.
Either or could be true, but yeah, I know in the original. Go ahead.
Well, because if it's laying flush on a piece of paper and it's moving like that, then that's significant.
No. Okay, I see. No, it wouldn't be hanging flush. It would either be suspended on a rod holding it up, or it would be suspended hanging down from a wire.
So that's
how they do these.
So then we're just for the audience. The circular vanilla plate underneath the wooden stick is just there for perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay. Just make sure.
Then it goes back. This continues for hours.
And that enabled him to
She
measure
said for
BG,
hours.
the gravitational constant, to an accuracy of 1%.
Did it?
And nobody improved on that for 100 years.
I'm gonna move a pencil for you. With just psychic powers. James, show us.
1% accuracy. That's that COVID accuracy, isn't it?
Now this guy, he said psychic powers. He's going to move this pencil on the edge of this table. Do it without the hand motions. Can you?
You are now prepared to wave the demonstration with the pencil.
Yes, and the reason is rather simple, because the pencil reacts to even the currents of the air conditioning in this studio. It will be very difficult to try to put controls on it in such a way that normal currents of air that are present all the time would not move the pencil. For example,
You had to balance it.
Yeah.
It moves very, very easily.
So easily.
Well, I couldn't really find one. Actually, had a lot of trouble finding one. Actually, one of the physics professors that was praising him had a little model that he held up, was joking that his TA couldn't get it to work and got frustrated with it and gave up. And I'm thinking to myself, over 200 years later, we don't have repeats of this experiment all over the place to determine big G? It didn't make much sense to me. So I said, okay, well, let's assume that did this somehow. He's a really smart guy, and we just haven't been able to get it to work again. Cavendish determined big G through that torsion rod experiment. So now he must have been really excited because he knows what this big G is. He knows what his mass is, or any other mass of an object on Earth. He knows what the radius of Earth is. So you can solve for the mass of Earth. So I looked at this and I said, okay, that makes sense. But I still had the question in my mind saying, wait a second though, why can't we do this torsion rod experiment now? So I'm really questioning this big G. How did they come up with that? But then I started to look at this. What if they were having trouble coming up with G, but they did something else to determine it? What if they did this? Or Cavendish did this? What if he said G is equal to the acceleration due to gravity, as he would have called it, times the radius of Earth squared divided by the mass of Earth? Of course, he doesn't have the mass of Earth, right? Well, he does have the radius of Earth. And at that time, they definitely knew how to calculate the volume of a sphere. And so since they know the total volume, they know that if they could figure out the average density of Earth, they can multiply that by this volume and get mass. So what I'm saying here is, if you follow where I'm going with this, how do we know they didn't guess, or that Cavendish didn't guess this mass of Earth? And then just use it to solve for G. And then do the opposite and say that he did this. He solved for the mass of Earth using that value of G.
So guys, for some of you that are familiar with mathematics, and you know how you can take variables like this and you can switch them around, especially if it's percentages, or if you're doing dividing, as you see with the equation he has on camera there. So there's ways to switch them around, and we already talked about how they determined that mass is the weight of gravity. Like, that's how they determine this stuff. So it would be, what Brian is theorizing here is that he's admitting that these people said that they couldn't figure out how to figure out the variable for G, which is the gravitational constant. They couldn't figure that out. So therefore he was like, well, what if he just guessed it was the mass of the Earth, or based off the mass of the Earth? And if you see it below the little circle on screen here, he's got V equals 4/3 pi RE to cubed. So that is talking about the radius value. So what he's supposing here, in order to make this math work, we've got two variables that have to be presupposed. That means you have the value of that G, they supplied that value, and no one could figure out how they supplied it. And it's based off of the radius value of the Earth, which means they've already assumed they know the circumference of the Earth to find the radius as well as the mass. Guys, these are massive assumptions, massive assumptions.
Yeah.
No one knows how much volumetric mass of the oceans there is, much less the entire Earth. They've never drilled past 8 miles down. They don't know how deep the Earth is to find the radius. Guys, in case you're not familiar, the radius is, if you look at the circle on screen behind Brian's right shoulder and you see an arrow, a horizontal arrow going from the center of the circle to the right-hand side edge of the circle, that's the radius that he's trying to show there. That means
half the diameter. Yeah.
Half the diameter of the circle. So they've got two massive assumptions inside their math in order to actually come up with these numbers, which they now call law. They call this fact. They call this what you must believe, and they teach it to you as soon as you can understand it in school.
They do. Yeah, the V there was for the volume, which is also, like you say, an assumption based off the radius and the area that they say the sphere of Earth is allegedly.
It's the same thing, just based on the algebra. And then if you plug both of those values into this equation up here and use the mass of any object, whether it's a man, a horse, a carriage, anything, and use the radius of Earth, you're going to get a force that's equal to the weight you get for that same object if you just multiply the mass of that object's time the acceleration due to gravity, or the rate at which the acceleration at which things fall towards Earth. Seem far-fetched? I don't know. The fact that we can't really get this experiment to work, this torsion rod experiment to work, is perplexing. Very perplexing.
The fact that you would even have something like this, that the fact that supposed clear thinking, logical math and physics teachers would say, you know what, I don't know where they got this variable. I can't figure out how they figured out. Oh, but there's not just one, but there's now two variables inside this equation that allows us to come to these conclusions. And someone else supplied those answers to me. I can't figure them out on my own. So therefore, I'm just going to have to trust them. This is the way it works, guys. This is how indoctrination is passed on. Wes, did you know that several years ago in 2016, I used to manage a mattress store, and I had a guy come in one time. He was a physics professor. And so me being, who I am, I had to ask him some questions. And so instead of me trying to sell him a mattress, I thought, let me flat smack this guy. And, because, apparently I don't care about money. So basically as we were walking around, I started asking him some fun questions like, oh, that's really cool. I was like, when I was younger, I was talking about him about being a physics professor. I said, when I was younger, I was trying to impress a girl because she was pretty smart, and she was in law school. And so I wrote a physics equation about every time she and I see each other, our attraction grows. The force of our attraction grows due to the increased acceleration. And I said, because I could supply my own variables. And he looked at me and he was like, that's clever. It's clever.
It is. It's almost like asking for somebody for their phone number in Paleo Hebrew. That's cool.
That's how I got my wife. So basically, I was trying to impress this girl because I literally could make up the equation that every time she and I saw each other, there was an increased force of attraction due to accelerated emotions. And that was just a variable that I assumed in that equation that she didn't question. So therefore, of course, it made sense on paper when she looked it over, right? And of course, either that she just thought, oh, that was not. She thought it was cute and all that stuff, but like at the same time, I just made it up. I literally just made up the variable that she would be more attracted to me every time I saw her, and this is how the math works out based upon that assumption.
That was a huge assumption, by the way.
It was a huge assumption. Yeah, I'm not with her. She didn't really like me like that. So, yeah, it was a failed shot. But anyway, the point is, so the idea that that I asked this guy after we're talking, because he realized I didn't major in physics or anything like that, but I studied it on my own because I was interested, because I'm a nerd. So because I have inventions and other things, and so I needed to know some stuff, so I had to study it. But the point is, like I asked him before he left the store, I said, sir, can you tell me something? Have you ever, in all of academia that you're aware of, have you ever heard of an experiment where you have a vacuum chamber with a ball inside that's spinning, and then there's like oxygen and argon and neon and hydrogen inside that vacuum chamber that goes and sticks to that ball while it's spinning inside that vacuum chamber. And he thought about it for a minute, and he looked at me and he goes, that's impossible. And I said, you're right. So why do they tell us that's what we live on? And he goes,
I heard you tell that before.
I don't think he really got it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
He didn't really quite understand what I was saying. So I just, I didn't want to press him. I just let him go.
I get what you're saying. The gist of it is that, is there a reproducible, verifiable experiment that you can observe in real time and practical application to reproduce what they say is happening? Things sticking to a sphere inside of a vacuum without a container, let alone a negative 18 torr vacuum that they say so-called space is. Nonetheless, this is a good time for a quote I could throw up.
Just not there, is it?
No. Would you read this one?
Sure. This is actually from Professor Bernstein, Letters to the British Association. He says, the theory that motions are produced through material attraction is absurd. Attracting such a power to mere matter, which is passive by nature, is a supreme illusion. It's lovely and easy theory to satisfy any man's mind, but when the practical test comes, it falls all to pieces and becomes one of the most ridiculous theories to common sense and judgment. It's pretty harsh.
That's what he said. It is. And so people often ask, where are the doctors? Where are all the professors and the highly educated people that believe like you guys do? If all the scientists have been trying to tell us that, the earth is this spherical spinning orb, and then you got guys like this come along. Now, you don't know if this guy kept his job very, very long, if he remained a professor at that place, if the British Association continued to accept his letters even, right? Because people like this are often obfuscated. They're shoved to the side. They're deemed as lunatics when they disagree with the experts, with the common narrative. And so they just kind of dwindled over time, but they've always been out here. Here's one right there.
There's one. So basically all the guys that questioned originally, once those guys died off and they had this new generation to indoctrinate from birth, then they don't ask critical thinking questions like this down the road.
No, eventually, but here we are, and we start to. We have started.
The Spirit of God drops in some amazing awakening critical thought, and suddenly we're asking questions.
Is it 1 John? The Spirit of truth will lead you into all truth. He sure does. I know that to be the truth. Nonetheless, so there was we talked a little bit about Newtonian physics and Newton gravity. That was 1687. We talked about how there was an assumed Earth mass, assumed radius involved in conceiving that gravitational constant, which Henry Cavendish came along 130 years later to add to Newton. But then we also have a guy come along in 1905. So we're talking a few hundred years later, a couple hundred years later, really. And can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So this is Einstein, Albert Einstein comes along, and he comes up in 1905 with special relativity. And in special relativity, it's a theory regarding the structure and relationship between space and time, conceptualizing space-time as a unified entity that could then bend, dilate, and contract. This is special relativity, okay? And that's just a very brief synopsis of one of the aspects of that facet of his theory of relativity.
Which actually works better with Newtonian mass attraction, law of gravitation.
Yeah, there was some, he built upon Newton's presuppositions, but then there was also some things that Einstein came up with that contradicted Newton's assumptions.
He actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for special relativity, and then here it is 10 years later, he's like, let me refine this. And so then he goes into general relativity, which even further contradicts Newton's Principia.
Exactly. And he says there that, general relativity is a theory of gravitation that began with the equivalence principle, under which the states of accelerated motion and being at rest in a gravitational field, for example, when standing on the surface of the Earth, are physically identical. It's all relative. You can't tell the difference if you were standing still versus if you were shooting, spinning, wobbling, and orbiting and jumping around through space, because it's just all relative. And What do you have to say there? Like,
I mean, it makes me wonder if this was a direct response to Airy's failure experiment.
I was just about to say the Michelson Gale, they were right before this, and those were experiments that we definitely need to have I've talked about before doing an episode where we just kind of cover the experiments of old, right? Where these guys in the early 1900s, before and afterwards, people have been going out and doing firsthand observations where they're able to test in nature these theories and the truth. And so, yeah, if somebody comes along and says, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, that this equivalence principle shows that under the state of accelerated motion, when being at rest in a gravitational field versus, accelerated motion, they're physically identical. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It just, that to me, that kind of relativity just throws away the idea of firsthand observation and experience, what you can feel and test and observe. It throw that out the window, because you wouldn't be able to tell the difference if you were sitting still or moving either way, according to this theory.
It's right. So I just need to stop practicing to be as fast as Bruce Lee, because I'm moving and staying still at the same time. I have mastered that level of physics and reality, apparently, according to general relativity, because you know what? Whether you see me coming or going, it's all relative, apparently. This is the most pseudoscientific wordplay, word salad nonsense attempted to intimidate those under him in authority, as well as anyone in academia that might not be a part of the machine that was propping up Einstein during this day. Now, we are about to read from Tesla, who did not support the machine or Einstein, and they destroyed this man over time. So this is where I'm not saying that Tesla was some sort of saint or anything, but at the same time, these guys didn't agree with each other at all, because Tesla was like, hey man, I've got 300 patents, you've got theories. And so there's like a big difference in practical science that anyone can do and observe versus Albert here, which, Albert B was just like, hey, I got some ideas, and he got all the acceptance of the mainstream academia with the Nobel Peace Prize out the gate. And then said, by 1905, do you realize Tesla was already showing people remote control wireless drones by 1905?
Really?
He's out there showing. He'd already invented the first X-ray machine, the first radio tubes. The dude's out there killing it in the science game. Yeah. Now, again, I'm not saying that Tesla's life was perfect, or that he wasn't a part of some of the secret societies, or didn't have some crazy claims in his life as far as spiritual claims. I'm just saying, as far as if we're just looking solely on the fact of these guys claim to be scientists, and what does that actually lead to in the real world? This guy on screen right here was nothing but theories, but he's propped up like a god. Here it is, 120 years after this general relativity. But we know it's hilarious, actually. This idea here of special relativity is actually used in the movie Interstellar, when they're going to a planet and they go to that water planet, and they got the waves coming after them. And then they finally get back in their ship, and they fly back to the ship that was orbiting the planet, and the other dude that was waiting on him.
That's right. The time dilation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were actually basing that off special relativity, which isn't even accepted anymore.
Really?
In science.
I was going to say, because I saw when I was reading about this that it said that clocks that are moving are said to move slower than clocks that are sitting still, or do I have it backwards? Either way, I'm like, it seems like you would have heard about this being proven.
Yeah, it's all nonsense. But that's what they'll do, though. A mainstream propaganda fueled $1 million budget Hollywood movie that's pushing pseudoscience. They know that you don't understand the difference anyway, so they're going to take special relativity and use that in their movie, because they know that no one's going to call them out on it, because everyone's just going to be like, oh, that was amazing. That was an amazing movie. Did you hear the soundtrack? I could barely hear the words, but the soundtrack was amazing. And the fifth dimension, which is love, he can touch through time. Don't let him leave. Don't let him leave, bro. So the point is, nobody even understands what they're listening or seeing, yet we've got propaganda shooting in your face from a theory that they've even rejected themselves. And it's crazy to me that this whole concept is built up as the end-all be-all of science, to the point where if Neil deGrasse Tyson is actually challenged on why in the world if the Earth and the Moon have been around for 4 million years and we're orbiting the sun, why haven't we actually drawn into the sun by this time? Why are we not actually pulled into the sun? And he'll say, it's relative. You don't have to understand inverse square law of gravity versus general relativity, because it's all relative. We're in space time. And then he just turns and walks away, and everyone's like, I don't know what to say to that. So then they just let it go.
Yeah.
You know, I do know what to
That
say to
works.
that. You know,
Yeah.
I say bozo, dude. You know, here's your clown nose. You dropped it on the way out. Like this is absolute lies perpetrated to get you away from the biblical cosmology, which is the Father saying, look, I made something ordered and structured that you can test and observe. He tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5 to test all things.
Yeah.
It doesn't say test all things inside this book. It doesn't say to test all things inside Hebrew first century literature or even Greek literature. It says test all things.
Hold fast to what is
I'll
good.
stop ranting.
You're good. Yeah. Meanwhile, this guy during all of this was sponsored by the Jesuits and the Z words. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also marrying his cousin.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I've heard that he had that's regardless. And he was cross-dressing too, but just some fun facts that you can look up and see were true about Einstein. Just some wacky, strange stuff going on there as he's putting out this shill propaganda. But you had this slide next, and go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to tell people these are what they claim. This is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. This is what mainstream science will put forward as the 4 fundamental forces of nature. Number 4 is actually in their lists. They have gravity as number 1. I actually restructured this list according to their actual forces that can be measured, and I have a chart a few slides down below that. So electromagnetic forces, that is what holds all things together through plasma. I've done a video on my channel. We didn't have time to go into it tonight because we may just do a special episode in season 2 where we get more detailed on this topic. But electromagnetic forces is what they will acknowledge is the strongest force that they can measure with instrumentation in all of creation. This is not mass attracted to mass, right? This is not that. This is simply that everything is filled with electricity, and there's a magnetic attraction that with magnetic fields, and it affects our weather. It is the downward pull that you feel, and it actually plays upon the plasma inside all matter, inside all things. There's things made up of plasma, 99% of it. There's actually a guy named Hans Alvin who won a Nobel Peace Prize for his book on plasma in the 1970s, and it was ignored. And he was trying to explain to people that this is what is actually being moved, and what's being pulled down is this idea that there's plasma in everything. It's even in smoke. And when you put magnetic fields with enough power, electromagnetic fields, to all things can be moved by this. And so just from a biblical perspective, Wes, I think it's interesting.
Me too.
Just will say just real quick, the ascent offering in Leviticus, when they burn the offerings and the smoke rises.
Yeah. He called it a sweet smelling aroma, a savory.
It is. So I think it's fascinating because it's like he made this downward pull, but then specifically when we have a fellowship meal with him, the residual result of that ignores that downward pull because its density is lighter, and he claims he can smell it and it's sweet. Yeah. I think that's fascinating. It actually rises up to him.
Yeah.
So to me, I don't know, it's something very beautiful there in that part of creation.
I'd agree. And these electromagnetic forces, happening within the plasma and the aether of the creation, they can so easily be manipulated. I noticed there was another video segment that I would have liked to have had time for tonight, just to show some at-home, do-it-yourself kind of experimentations that it can happen with the kids. Just one example of that is that if you apply friction to things like a comb or a PVC pipe, you can obviously attract your hair with a balloon, but apply friction to these things and you create some static, some electrostatic, and that then can manipulate the forces just by being able to attach something like you can attach a balloon to a wall after you rub it on your head. I saw a video the other day of people doing that with all kinds of things. After you just apply some static, you can put like calculators and stuff on the wall if you do it right with the right kind of wall. But then furthermore, there's, you have a stream of water coming out of your faucet. If you put something with a lot of static buildup charge on it next to that stream, it'll either deflect, it usually deflects the water stream and bends it. And just fun little things like that you can do with the kids, and to show that, static electricity and different things like that can so easily defeat and defy so-called gravity.
That's right. Yeah, it really can. And that's the biggest one on the list, guys. 2, 3, and 4. Number 2 is the strong nuclear forces. That's what they claim is actually holding your inert atoms together, your electrons and protons and neutrons. That's what's holding them together. The weak nuclear force, they claim they can only observe that in radioactive decay. So basically, on anything that's considered radioactive, like an isotope that is breaking down, that's the little force that's put off. And then gravity is the weakest of all of these, supposedly. I personally don't think it even exists at all, according to what they're saying. But if you scroll down two little more slides, it'll actually show a little.
No, this one.
Just one more down.
This
that
one?
fundamental forces right there.
Oh, this one.
The gray one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that one just gives you an actual. If you look in the very center column, it says strength. And the electromagnetic forces are what they would call 1/37. So they're saying that the strong force is what they would call the strong nucleus force, which just holds your atom, your neutrons and electrons inside your body together. And the electromagnetic force is the other one that they can measure that they claim is very strong. And then you go down to the weak force, which is based off of decay. And then you go to gravity, which is, look at that. It says 6 times 10 to the negative 39. Guys, this is so weak in any type of physics or measurements. Anything that's below 0 is weak, obviously. Now, 6 times 10 to the negative 39th. That's a ton of zeros. And that is so weak, it is literally unobservable on most instrumentation. This is why, as we said, the Cavendish experiment, the assistant gets mad because he thinks it's not working, because it doesn't work.
On another phallic-shaped instrument. Yep. And so it's just interesting to me that, considering that with this alleged ball 25,000 miles around, covered with the surface of it said to be covered in 75% water with all our oceans and seas, and yet it's all surrounded by this vacuum without a container and spinning, whirling, orbiting, wobbling. And so this force that they say holds all of those trillions upon quadrillions of gallons of ocean water to this spinning ball surrounded by the vacuum. If that force is so strong enough to be able to do that, it just seems inconsistent to me that it would allow things like the average cumulus cloud, they say, weighs 1.1 million pounds. And even though the density of it is spread out so that it's able to float above the air, it seems super selective that the same force that would hold all the water to the spinning ball would then also allow birds and bees, flies to, fly off the ground, levitate in some cases, like bees are said to do, and that we could even move, stand up, and function at all, considering the strength of such a force that should hold all that water to the ball. But it just seems super selective. And then how does it know without a container where to hold the pressurized atmosphere against the complete and total vacuum surrounding it? That gravity, though, it does it all. That's why I say earlier it's kind of a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, that's actually the last thing on this little chart that we have on screen that I want to point out. You're talking about gravity does it all, but look at the bottom here under range, the third column on the right, and it says range for gravity is infinite. Look two up though. Electromagnetism, it says the range for that is infinite as well. Oh, gee, I wonder why. Because, guys, everything that is happening through electromagnetism, they call gravity.
Literally. And I hate to break it to you, but we live in a finite creation, and infinity isn't provable. You can't verify infinity.
That too. But the way that it looks, and they've got that little picture there in the second column right next to the word. You got the little plus and negative signs and how they relate to each other. The point of that is it's communicable, meaning it can be shared, it can be transferred. This through toroidal fields and electromagnetic fields. The power can be shared and passed on. So this is why they would call it infinite, because they don't know how far it goes to stop it, because they can only measure what's inside of the enclosed firmament where we live. So from what they can measure inside where we live, it seems infinite to them, because it permeates all of creation, all of the enclosed space that we live. And this, to me, is what causes the density and buoyancy and the layering of objects, and why oxygen stays closer to the ground, but hydrogen, neon, argon, and nitrogen floats up above. So, but I don't want to get too technical.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, it creates this medium in which the displacement can occur for the plasma to hold the different masses and matter of the gases and things that make up our atmosphere and so forth. So then you have this enclosed structure, right? Like I was just saying, Genesis 1:6-8 tells us the firmament, as we went over in first episode, that has now enclosed the plasma that makes up all of creation. And then you have layering happening where things can settle, and things that are heavier, more dense than the material around them, the medium, the environment in which they're surrounded by. If it's more dense than that medium, it's going to sink, it's going to fall. Same thing happens in water. Whereas if you drop a cork, it's more dense than the air, it's less dense than the water, so it's going to float on the water, even though it dropped in the air. So yeah, I hope that paints a better picture for you for how these things are happening, because I struggled with it for a little while. It felt like a more advanced topic to try to explain until I did some more studies.
Yeah, it can be. I think the most difficult part for most people is weeding through the amazing amount of bad information out there in order to try to find the good information. So, and in fact, Glowbusters is welcome, Bob. Thanks for watching. He's in the chat right now, and he's just adding on to what you're saying, which is actually, we've been talking about this. We haven't even had a chance to get to it yet, which is the inverse square law of gravity. And he's saying it just means gravity goes from super weak to infinitely weak through the inverse square law. But and that is true, and a lot of people don't know what that means. What they say with the inverse square law is they'll say that basically the further it gets away, the less attraction there is, and then they that's inversely squared, meaning that if something weighs a certain amount, you want to put it on screen.
Yeah, I was just supposed to say, let's go ahead and look at that.
I don't remember if we had. Okay, you did have a picture.
Yeah, I added this last minute, so I was glad I did. And it says, if Newton's formula for gravity is true, and we saw earlier in the explanation for Newtonian gravity that he included an inverse square law, things should fall faster the closer they are dropped to the Earth's surface, because the formula for gravity has what's called an inverse square law. The force would get stronger the closer you are to Earth. This has never been observed. All objects fall at 9.8 meters per second and until they reach terminal velocity. Don't let gravity dumb you down. Yeah. The energy twice as far from the source is spread over 4 times the area, hence 1/4 the intensity. Yeah. But as you see, it gets more concentrated the closer it is, and this is what is purported to happen with gravity. But as we said, it's not observable.
It's not. This would mean that people that dig down 2-3 miles deep and into mountain mines, that they should start weighing more, because they're getting closer towards the center mass of the Earth. Is that right?
That's what this would, allegedly.
This would conclude. But we don't see that. They don't come out complaining about how gravity changes down there in any way. So
that's right. Here's another quote. This is another one, right? Yeah, it's a different one from. Oh well, that wasn't the one I was thinking of. We got to go back though, because Tesla had some stuff to say about Einstein, and I believe there was a quote. I forget if it was a magazine or where, but here it is. But somebody asked Einstein what it felt like to be the most intelligent person in the world at the time, and he said he wouldn't know. You'd have to ask Tesla. We don't have that quote put on screen, but I did verify that was something that was said, although it might have been jokingly or with some rivalry going on there, but nonetheless. Tesla ended up saying, so this is today's scientists, and he said, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. And he said that in Modern Mechanics magazine in 1934. And so that goes back to what you were saying earlier, Sean, about the difference between Tesla and Einstein. Einstein was getting Nobel Peace Prizes for just what he had to theorize in his papers that he wrote, whereas Tesla's out here getting patents on actual inventions. And I think we lost Sean. Sean, can you hear me? That's all right. Sean, chime in when you're able to make it back. I'm going to keep going. There's another quote. This is just a short version of it, I do believe, because Tesla. Oh, yeah, we lost him. He's coming. He said, give it a minute. It should pop back up. But Tesla said, I hold that space cannot be curved. But there's a longer quote here. Here it is. And he said this in the New York Herald Tribune, 1932. Tesla says, I hold that space cannot be curved for the simple reason that it can have no properties. He goes on to say that in the presence of large bodies, space becomes curved is equivalent to stating that something can act upon nothing. I, for one, refuse to subscribe to such a view. So this is Tesla in direct response. This is, like I said, in 1932 that he says this, which was 17 years after general relativity from Einstein. And so he's kind of responding to the guy and his theories that are being put forth and propagated and accepted as the common narrative at the time. So he's directly refuting it. He's like, you're talking about bendy space. I don't know if y'all caught, like, from the teaser that we played at the beginning of this episode, there was a quick clip right when Conspiracy Music Guru started singing. There was a quick clip of a guy, and he had this big round, circular cylindrical tub, and he had a blue kind of plastic rubbery tarp spread out over the top of it. And then he had some marbles, and he'd throw them, and he'd let them roll around like in the cyclone, because he'd have a big heavier marble sitting in the dead center of that, creating this warped time space representation that he was trying to show in an experiment. And then he sends all these little marbles around it, going in a cyclone around that heavy drop in the represented time space, and then they all just collide and they just sink into one another, right? They just hit the center. But that was his representation and so-called experiment to represent this special relativity of bending time space that Tesla directly says, listen, you can't make anything happen to nothing. It's nothing. Glad you're back, brother.
Yeah, sorry, man. I don't know what's going on over here.
No worries. Well, there was one other quote about the theory of relativity. I don't think... Oh, yeah, here it was. Okay, cool. And Tesla did say this in the New York Times. Can you read it?
Sure. It's 1935. Tesla says the theory of relativity is a mass of errors and deceptive ideas violently opposed to the teachings of great men, the science of the past, and even to common sense. The theory wraps all these errors and fallacies and clothes them in magnificent mathematical garb which fascinates, dazzles, and makes people blind to the underlying errors. The theory is like a beggar clothed in purple, whom ignorant people take for a king. Its exponents are very brilliant men, but they are metaphysicists rather than scientists. Not a single one of the relativity propositions has been proved. Wow, that's in 1935, right?
That's right. He did say that about 15, 20 years after the fact.
Yeah.
He comes out.
So this is contemporary with the days of Einstein and everyone else that's probably lapping up Einstein's theory, which is being pushed. And so this guy's saying, look, all this is just literally just a flash in the pan. Like, this is not, there's no substance behind this. Exactly. And this is fascinating. He calls them metaphysicists, because that's an actual, back then that terminology was highly connected to the occult.
Right. I'd imagine. Yeah. Just talking about theoretical hypotheticals of what ifs, because it's not based on any reality, as he said. And speaking of theories, unproven, not based on any reality, there's the graviton. So along the history of when they were trying to develop their reasoning behind how gravity is caused, at some point in time, I didn't mark the date, and it was mentioned, like, just like they said earlier, Kepler had proposed the idea that some force must hold the planetary bodies in order in some case. But just like that, in that same fashion, throughout history, people have mentioned that there must be some sort of particle causing this gravity to exist. And the one that they came up with was graviton. But they admit, anytime you look up the definition of this, you look into it, it's going to be admitted that it's a hypothetical, unproven, and cannot be seen, hasn't been observed particle. So it's like, why? But we have written here, in theories of quantum gravity, the graviton is the hypothetical quantum of gravity, an elementary particle that mediates the force of gravity. Sounds like a make-believe priest, doesn't it? Mediates.
I was going to say, mediates to what? You mean it's the conduit
to the universe.
What? So if it's the conduit that makes gravity as a force have some sort of effect on reality, well, what is it connecting to at a level? And that's where they use the word quantum. I need to do some more research on the word quantum, because that to me is where the mysticism comes in. This is where the metaphysics comes in, to where it's the unseen, not just at a microscopic level. And that's what I mean. I mean, like, literally, they start talking quantum. I think this is, where they they expound upon this, if I'm not mistaken, and go into string theory. Because then you start going into quantum realms and different things, like things you can't see that are propagated by occult.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember reading that when you went into some more on the graviton, and we don't have really too much to say. It's just a particle that they theorize could be part of what causes gravity, but they themselves admit it doesn't, hasn't been proven to exist. Just made up. And so where are we at now? I think we've gone through all of this. First time behind the controls here.
It's okay. We already read that one.
Yeah, we did. Gerard Hickson. Was that the one we read? Yeah, we read that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. David Wardlaw Scott, Terra Firma was a book he wrote. I want to say that was early 1900s. Nonetheless, he writes that any object which is heavier than the air and which is unsupported has a natural tendency to fall by its own weight. Newton's famous apple at Woolsthorpe, I guess that was the city he was in, or any other apple when ripe, loses hold of its stalk and being heavier than the air, drops as a matter of necessity to the ground, totally irrespective of any attraction to the earth. For if such attraction existed, why does not the earth attract the rising smoke, which is nearly so heavy as the apple? Which is not nearly so heavy as the apple. I got it. The answer is simple. Because the smoke is lighter than the air and therefore does not fall but ascends. Gravitation is only a subterfuge employed by Newton in his attempt to prove that the earth revolves around the sun. And the quicker it is relegated to the tomb of all the Capulets, the better will it be for all classes of society.
That's hilarious.
Well
stated.
stated.
Saying that the quicker it dies, the Capulets. That's hilarious. To me, it's like, people are in the chat are talking about our joke about the quantum graviton and the priesthood. Isaac Newton was this. Okay, so guys, I just want you to get a kind of a grasp of this idea here. And I try to cover this briefly on my channel, my Investigating Babylon series, where I talked about the origins of NASA and how they chose a fake priesthood. So guys, back the concepts of Babylon, when they're imploring this types of modern language to describe old belief sets, all the way back to ancient Hindu theology. And they've chosen new ministers of this information, which would be called a priest. And these guys are trained to know the nitty-gritty, the details of this information to indoctrinate the masses, even to the point of creating fake demonstrations or illustrations in order for you to believe the deceptiveness of the idea they're pushing forward with the pseudo garbage language. So this is what ancient Babylonian priests would also be tasked to do as well. As I've referenced in the past, there used to be priests to Zeus in the Greek city-states who would build large contraptions in order to make it seem like the gods were doing something inside the temple. So physical, mechanical, made of wood contraptions that they, like automatons that would move on water and steam and different things, in order to then they would attribute the movement of those things to the gods or to Zeus. So this is what we see with the rocket launches. This is what we see with all the different instrumentation that they build that they claim is based off this fundamental science, which goes nowhere, does nothing, has no contributing value, because it's all theory. It's all propaganda by a priesthood. And that's who these scientists, quote unquote, metaphysicists, as Tesla called them, that's who they are. They took off the black robes of Babylonian priesthood that looks all ominous, and they put on these little white coats. And then suddenly you think, oh, that looks trustworthy. He put on a little white coat. He looks nice. I'm like, what's he saying? What's he talking about? Oh, look, he's doing a little TV show. He's got a little bow tie. He's doing little basic 7th grade science experiments to get my trust. And then all of it, he's going to lean into the philosophy, the metaphysicist religious talk of things that are unproven, undemonstrable. And he's going to claim, oh, this basic science is because of this unproven advanced physics. This is the mental leaps of logics that they do to brainwash, indoctrinate the masses with Babylonian religion that people don't even realize what they're looking at or hearing. So they are a priesthood.
It really is. Yeah, it makes so much sense when you put it like that, because we see the same kind of thing. Nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And it's almost as if these constructs that they come up with are related to idols that are giving glory back to a false god of sorts, right? People have this invisible force that you can't see, can't prove exists, but holds all things together and makes the whole system work as it does according to their ideas. But really, it's just it's almost like a false god. Well, Thomas Winship of Zetetica Cosmogony on page 36 of that book. Oh, it's your turn in it.
Oh, sure. Thomas, he's talking like this. He said the law of gravitation is said by the advocates of the Newtonian system of astronomy to be the greatest discovery of science and the foundation of the whole of modern astronomy. If, therefore, it can be shown that gravitation is a pure assumption and an imagination of the mind only, that it has no existence outside the brains of its expounders and advocates, then the whole of the hypothesis of this modern so-called science falls to the ground as flat as the surface of the ocean. And this most exact of all sciences, this wonderful feat of the intellect, becomes at once the most ridiculous superstition and most gigantic imposture to which ignorance and credulity could ever be exposed. By the way, credulity is something that's credible.
Right.
Something that's
this was 1899. So this was even before Thomas Winship here wrote this book in 1899, before Einstein came out with his stuff. Right before it.
Yeah.
5 years.
So it seems like they were getting quite a bit of pushback during that generation. And this is why at the turn of the 20th century, they had to prop up a whole bunch of, it's crazy. It's like they made up a lie with Newton. They doubled down with Einstein.
Exactly.
And now with deGrasse Tyson, what do they call him? Neil deGrasse, NDT. Now with NDT, they're literally tripling down with quantum theory, entanglement, string theory. It's hilarious. Every time they start to get pushback on their lies, they make the lie bigger.
They do. They just bury themselves with lies. Just tell a lie to cover up the last lie, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's crazy. What's a good one to go to next? We got a lot of quotes tonight because there's not a whole lot of scripture. We just refer you back to the videos we've done so far where we show some. Go ahead.
Some episodes are scripture heavy. This isn't as more, science and history heavy. Yeah,
it is, right? Did we just read this one?
Yeah.
Yep. So let's go ahead and check this one out. This was in Crossland, New Principia, another book. And in this one, they write, we are asked by the Newtonian to believe that the action of gravitation, which we can easily overcome by the slightest exercise of volition and raising a hand or a foot, is so overwhelmingly violent when we lose our balance and fall a distance of a few feet, that this force, which is imperceptible under usual conditions, may, under extraordinary circumstances, cause the fracture of every limb we possess. I love the way these guys speak. Neil deGrasse Tyson definitely doesn't, speak like this. But he says, common sense must reject this interpretation. Gravitation does not furnish a satisfactory explanation of the phenomena here described, whereas the definition of weight already given does. For a body seeking in the readiest manner its level of stability would produce precisely the result experienced. If the influence which kept us securely attached to this earth were identical with that which is powerful enough to disturb a distant planet in its orbit, we should be more immediately conscious of its masterful presence and potency. Whereas this influence is so impotent in the very spot where it is supposed to be most dominant that we find an insurmountable difficulty in accepting the idea of its existence. I concur, good sir.
Yeah. It's baffling to me. And what's crazier, guys, is they will tell you that balls of gas, they'll say that Jupiter is a ball of gas. For one, there's a firmament. There is no space like they describe it. We're living in an enclosed system. But they tell you that Jupiter is the biggest in our solar system of the planets, and it's under the sun in size, second to the sun, and that it's just a collection of gases. But that literally the moon is affected by the mass of the gases of Jupiter. Yeah, I mean, just think about that.
That's what they say. Yeah. I say it's just a light in the firmament, but Jupiter.
I mean, the stuff that they have to come up with, and this is why, I was wrong. They're not tripling down. They've quadrupled down to the magnitude of 100 zeros, right?
Exponentially.
Because with every article they publish, everything is presupposed off this model. Everything from distant quarks to Kuiper belt to dark matter, which I mean, just completely nonsense. You know, it breaks my heart. I had a fellow believer who I was speaking with back in 2012, and very educated woman, smart person, and she's a brilliant writer. I was a part of this writers group back in the day, and I was working on my Noah novels, and so and I was talking to her, and and just in general conversation, she said, "Oh, did you hear about the new discovery on dark matter?"
Oh no!
And she was like all excited, right? She was. And
Are you
I was
whispering like you sounded like Biden for a second?
Right.
I wrote the bill. 1.9 trillion.
She leaned in all creepily, hands over my shoulders, and let me tell you about dark matter.
Let me whisper in your ear. Tell you something that you might like to hear.
That would be a really, really funny remix. That'd be hilarious. I could see you and
Marlo
and Mike doing that, and Marlo. Yep, Marlo in there swinging a bat. It'd be hilarious. So, hopefully half the audience doesn't get that reference. But the point is, like, it just thinking back now, like I was kind of surprised at this woman's passion about the topic just to bring it up, but then thinking back now, it breaks my heart to see like she was so caught up in it. She thought it was real, Yeah. So if I ever
bring
see
my
her
cauldron
again,
and my crystal ball so I can tell you about the dark matter.
Yeah, goodness.
But this young lady here, Miss Chloe, has something to say. Gotta love Chloe. Every time you see that little precious face looking all confused. And I am too, Chloe. So you're saying sometimes gravity makes things stick to stuff, and sometimes it makes it orbit around stuff? Like, it's such a simple concept to think of it in this way, but it's so true. It's powerful because if all things are attracted to one another, and that's the gravity that's causing what we observe, then yeah. And there's a quote even here in there that goes along with that, I believe. Somewhere. Yeah, right. Sorry for all the scrolling tonight, but I'm just going to read it off right here because I'm pretty sure I had it pulled up right here. And it was a gentleman. Here it is. In A. Gabern, in a book called Sun, Moon, and Stars, he said, if the sun is pulling with such power at the Earth and all her sister planets, why do they not fall down upon him being the sun? Because if the sun is said to be 1.9 million times the size of Earth, then it would have, according to that equation earlier, it would have exponentially more gravity than any of these other so-called heavenly bodies do floating around in so-called space. So yeah, it would eventually, something would collide. But it's not been observed.
And of course, even in their model, they don't know what the sun's made of. They don't know what it is. They couldn't tell you why you would have any force of attraction to the sun. I mean, they tell you it's a burning ball of gas built off of different types of fusion.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you're sitting there going, again, that's another gas ball that suddenly weighs more than all the metals and steel and lead inside the Earth that we can observe. And you're like, how does that? What? And not only that, but it's reaching across a medium that we can't even prove there's attraction. You see what I'm saying?
Through the vacuum, where there's no
right.
matter or mass, it's somehow, yeah.
So this is where you have to have stuff like general relativity, which says, it bends space-time and it warps things, and so that it's relatively constant to where it's, even though it's 93 million miles away sometimes, and then the rest of the time it's a little bit further. But then suddenly relatively, you're right next to it as much as you are away from it. So it's all nonsense. My brain just starts to hurt from frustration more than it does from the science.
Yeah.
All this, just the frustration of like, once you really start to see this topic, guys, it becomes so, the world becomes the society that we live in, the propagation of this information day in and day out, every news clip, multiple articles a day are written for this, compiled upon, it's its own soap opera of the storyline, the plot twists that happen within the storyline within people, like space.com and NASA, whereas they continually put out these stories that they have to remember. Oh, what did we talk about in season 5 in 1964? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so they have to continually remember the lies they've told previously and have catalogs of that except for the telemetric data for the moon. They lost all that. But besides those lies that they can't remember from that season, they have to remember all the other seasons' lies in order to propagate this ongoing soap opera to which some people die. Nope, they're brought back to professors. It sounds like an incredible soap opera that we've seen before. It's the same formulaic concept. It's episodic. It's continual. How many times have they seen a Halloween comic come by in October? How many times, you know what I'm saying? Like, it gets ridiculous, but the average person, they don't catch it because they don't have any long-term memory. You know, the average person is so distracted with life and the other machinations of deception that is implored upon them in our society that it does take shows like Wes and I to actually focus on the topic for a minute and compile the information, give it to you so that you hopefully can learn something, realize your creator loves you. You've been created in a testable, demonstrable, enclosed environment that's suited just for you. You don't have to worry about a sun going supernova in 200,000 years or by chance being hit by a micrometeor asteroid that suddenly would just fall down. You don't have to worry about all that stuff, guys. The Father loves you. He's created literally a closed container for you to live in, and he lives right above you. So I just hope, hopefully encourage.
And it's stable. It's at rest. You don't have to have these imaginary forces with the Father's actual creation and its reality, because he created it to be stable and he wanted it to be a peaceful place, right? But nonetheless, he holds all things up and all things together by the power of his word, not through gravity. And we have a couple other quotes, but it'd just be beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah. Just think about the psychology, Wes. Think about the average person that goes through life and they hear, you know, on one hand, they have the good news, right? On one hand, they would read something like, you know, the idea of the promise of the Creator to those who are in covenant with him. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, succeed you, right? Why? That's a beautiful promise. He knows what he's got in mind for us. He at Jubilees 122, he wants us to realize that he is more righteous than we are. And then when we fail to do his law and come to him in repentance, he will then show us that he is a father to us and that he loves us. Right? Amen. How beautiful of that promise versus what they hear in the world, which is, oh yeah, you came from nothing. You're spinning wildlessly in nothing. And soon all that's going to die, heat death. And then if we live beyond that, you might face the great retraction instead of the great expansion, because everything's going to come back to a point of infinite density, which is nonsense. And, oh, but don't worry about it. It's so far away. You just do you, boo, and you have a good time on this rock as we're floating through. And
live your best life.
Live your best life now. Don't worry about it. But what happens in the psyche of that person when they hear that information, 7th, 8th grade, and they walk away into the rest of their life thinking, you know, what is going to be like?
What does it all mean? You know, I remember how it affected me, how I felt about it, that I came from nothing. I'm here to do whatever I decide, whatever it makes it, you know, whatever I make it out to be. And that I'm on the road to nowhere because we're just insignificant on a speck floating amongst infinite amount of specks with unlimited potential of other life forms out there on the road to nowhere. And it's not at all the truth.
Yep. It's really sad. And so when it comes to gravity, what they've tried to do is they've tried to figure out a way to make the model work. But meanwhile, there's an entire other branch of science that's demonstrable, which is called electricity, that people can actually demonstrate and realize, oh, these are magnetic fields, these are electrical magnetic fields. And so then they tried to appease that questioning by saying, well, it's the molten core of the Earth that pushes off the magnetic field around the Earth like a big egg. And actually they present it in graphics like a spider, which I think is pretty hilarious. But they try to appease that branch of questioning that naturally arose, but simultaneously they had this other branch of propaganda being pushed with the gravity theory, because that made the entire model work. But what they didn't realize is that what they had already concluded the center mass of the Earth to be and the supposed temperatures of it would actually nullify the idea of a magnetic field being made around the Earth. So therefore, they have this huge piece of science over here that for the last 140, well, probably over 200 years has been running parallel with all their propaganda. And it's the electromagnetic side of people that are actually observing, engineers, physicists that are doing real world practical experiments to realize, oh, none of this works in the gravitational model. This works so then the reason I'm saying all this, Wes, is naturally that leads to the question of where's the electromagnetism coming from? Where's the power source coming from that keeps all things held together and allows all things to move and flow and breathe and have being. Where is the power source coming from? Guys, there's only one book that offers the answer to you. And that all of demonstrable science leads to the conclusion that book claims that there's a creator. He lives in a 7-story house. He lives at the top floor. He loves you. And he actually made this house to facilitate the power that allows all things to function and flow and have meaning and being. So this is why they have to continue with the propagating the big lie while ignoring the substance, the little stuff on the side. They have to keep with the big lie, and that big lie is propagated with the big G, the big gravity concept. So that's why we hope we did it justice. I think I really want to give a big shout out to Wes this episode. He did most of the research because I've been really busy this last week, and I've also been traveling. So Wes, thanks so much, brother, for putting in so much hard work this week in this episode.
My pleasure, brother. All praise to the Most High. Bless his holy name. I thank him for you. Thank him for this opportunity, and each one of you viewers out there. I know we're coming up on short time. Didn't you have another clip? You talked about a buoyant force clip.
We went well past
we
that.
Blew through it, right on past it. That's all right.
Yeah.
We didn't feel any attraction to keep us, held to that. But nonetheless, there is a teaser for next week's episode because we do plan. Do you plan on being back home next Wednesday?
Oh yeah, we'll be here. We'll be ready.
Fantastic. Yep, we'll get to see Sean in all his glory of the lighting and the green screen.
Did you want to do the interview? Did you want people to see the interview?
Oh yeah. Okay, cool. So I forgot all about that. Thank you for reminding me. We had a brother, and his name is Matthew Beavers. A brother sent in a viewer submitted interview, street interview kind of style thing, whereas we put out the invitation earlier on in this season to anybody that wants to, anybody willing. We have the chance to come on here and show your skills of speaking to people, whether they be your family members, friends, random strangers on the street, wherever it be. You are welcome to film yourself. Keep it clean, keep it family oriented, and keep it, concentrated on the topic. Concentrate on the topic, and you're welcome to send that over to us, and we will air what we can. We got another one coming soon from Ms. Morgan, who also has put forth one, but this one today, Matthew Beavers, shout out to you. He's interviewing his sister. We really appreciate you, brother. Let's check it out.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Matthew Beavers from Back to the Covenant. So I'm hanging out with my awesome sister, Amanda. Say what's up. So I'm just going to ask her a few questions, and we're going to look at Scripture and see what Scripture has to say about the flat Earth topic. All right, so do you believe that the Scriptures is the inspired word of the Most High?
Yes.
All right, it's a foundational question. All right, do you believe that we're 93 million miles away from the sun, 238,000 miles from the moon, and right now at the equator we're spinning 1,000 miles per hour?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know all the exact numbers. Sounds good.
All right, so what I just asked you are pillars of foundational tenets or teachings of the heliocentric model. And also, do you believe that the Earth is round? That's the other question. Currently, you do.
Yeah, I mean,
But
that's all I've ever known.
But you're questioning. That's all you've ever known. But you're questioning from what I've showed you, stuff I've shared lately. So the heliocentric model is just to refresh your memory if you don't remember, or anybody else watching. So the heliocentric model is the sun is the center of the universe and everything spins around it at crazy speeds. That's what mainstream science teaches us. On the other side of the conversation, or whatever you want to call it, discussion, is the geocentric model, which the Earth is stationary, doesn't move. It is the center of the universe and everything spins around it. All right, so since you said you believe in the Scriptures, let's see what Scripture has to say on this topic to see what we can find out. So the first verse is Psalms 93:1.
The Lord reigns, he is clothed with majesty. The Lord is clothed, he has girded himself with strength. Surely the world is established so that it cannot be moved.
All right, cannot be moved. Let's go to the next verse in 1 Chronicles 16:30. It's amazing how quickly you can get to a verse with a phone app.
Tremble before him, all the earth. The world also is firmly established. It shall not be moved.
What do those two verses say to you?
The earth doesn't move.
Earth doesn't move. All right, so we have two proof texts for the geocentric model according to Scripture. So let's check out one more verse in Joshua chapter 10. See if we can find another one. Verses 12 through 14.
Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher?
Jasher or Yasher, depending.
So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And then there has been no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel.
So what do these verses say to you about the sun and the moon in the context of this story?
That they're over us?
That they're moving. So it would make sense logically if they were moving, he asked for them to stand still for a day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
So we have two verses that say the earth is stationary, and then this verse, and there's others, but this is a really cool, miraculous story. But from this verse, we can see that the sun and the moon are moving, but they stopped. And I have verified this in Jasher, so there's that. So one more question. Where is heaven?
In the sky above us.
Above us? All right, I guess we can check out one more verse. Go to Genesis 1:8. This is a very foundational verse.
And God called the firmament heaven, so the evening and the morning were the second day. Oh, it's in the firmament.
So the firmament, the dome, 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 dome. All right, so thanks for your time. Give me some nuts. All right, shalom and y'all bless.
Shalom to you as well, Mr. Beavers. We so appreciate that. Hey, that's the way to do it right there. Keep it succinct. He sowed the word like the sower does, right? He had to read some scriptures, talked about those. He expressed to her the basics, right? The heliocentric versus the geocentric model. He was really warm and welcoming, friendly. He was confident in his approach and what he had to say, and had a smile on his face the whole time. Notice that much like what we've done with this show here now for 13 episodes, Sean, this gentleman, like us, didn't call anybody a globetard. He didn't call anybody what's some of the other ones? Curvert, a Coriolis defect. He didn't use any of these slurs, right? And it doesn't need to be done to discuss these things in a calm and sophisticated, well thought out manner where you really wish to get points across to the person you're speaking to. It doesn't help to use insults and ad hominem behaviors. So that gentleman did so very well, and I commend him, and I thank you for what you did there, Matthew. Anybody else who wants to follow suit is welcome to do so.
Yeah, that was a great little interview. She's definitely be having something to think about. So
that's right.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Do you have anything else you want to cover tonight?
I don't, man. No, I think we had a blast just getting through what we had to get through. Wish there was more scriptures and videos for you guys, but we'll always be back next week.
That's right. All
Speaking of, episode number 14 coming Wednesday. We plan to be on time as well next Wednesday. Nope.
What is gravity?
Nope.
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
Sean.
Wow.
No, here's the difference.
Wrong one.
All right, guys. All right. let's get the right one here. Technical difficulties.
Episode 14. It's not rocket science.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
NASA, the great deception. NASA, the great deception. NASA, the great deception. NASA, the great deception. NASA, NASA. Don't believe a word that they say. That's right. NASA, don't believe a word that they say. 1, 2, 3, let's go.
Yeah, that's episode 14. It's not rocket science, premiering next Wednesday. Stay tuned. Check it out. If you guys have enjoyed what we've been doing here, we would absolutely love it. If you would, first of all, like, subscribe, and follow get the notifications, hit that bell, do all the good stuff so that you can continue to be notified and follow along with what we're doing. We hope to bless you. We hope to edify you with contextual clarity, understanding, and just to be able to show you how each individual piece of the creation and how expose the lies against the truth of the creation, but show how it all is works together and how it relates to God's overall plan of salvation and how these lies don't. So we've enjoyed being able to do that for you. If it's done so, and if you've been blessed by it, please do so for others. We welcome you to share it, rip it, mirror this content. You're welcome to download it, put it on your channel. We'd love for it to just get out there. Otherwise, if you feel compelled to further support what we're doing, we would love your contribution, and we would put it to good use to greater edify the people and get better at what we're doing. So we would love it if you'd consider the PayPal options and the Patreon monthly contribution. We'd appreciate it very much. And thank you to all those that are already set up with that. Much love to everyone. Much love to you, Sean. Thank you kindly for your help. Got you on mute. There you go.
You too, brother. This is always fun. Another great episode.
Yeah, very much enjoyed it. Even though you were on the road, you made it happen. I really appreciate it. And otherwise, we got a quick song for you guys to end out with. Looking forward to seeing each and every one of you next week. Much love to you all. Bless God. May he bless you, and shalom to you from under the 7 domes.
See you guys later.
We're up pretty high, our heads are on